I always tell people to dream big dreams, to follow their passion, dream big dreams that hopefully can change the world and make it a better place. And it probably expect that if you try to do that, you're going to, like I did, often run up against a lot of criticism. And I just would say, don't give up easily.
Welcome back to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. I'm your host, Michael Oved. Terrence Gable is our producer, and we've got a great episode for you today. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's guest. Dr. Robert Langer is the co-founder of Moderna, the now $30 billion pharmaceutical and biotechnology company that, among other feats, developed one of the primary coronavirus vaccines. He has co-founded over 40 companies, his patents have been licensed or sub-licensed to over 400 companies, and he personally is worth over $1.2 billion. Dr. Langer is one of 8 institute professors at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the highest honor that can be awarded to a faculty member. He has written over 1,500 articles, which have been cited over 413,000 times. His H index of 319 is the highest of any engineer in history and the third highest of any individual in any field. Dr. Langer has served as chairman of the FDA's Science Board, its highest advisory board, from 1999 to 2002. He has over 220 awards, 41 honorary doctorates, and he's been elected to the National Academy of Medicine, the National Academy of Engineering, the National Academy of Sciences, and the National Academy of Inventors. Dr. Langer, thank you again for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Throughout your entire life, Doctor, you've chosen to take the unconventional route. What in your childhood instilled this desire in you?
Well, I don't know that in my childhood, that I always was that way. I mean, I think what happened is I had a pretty normal life. I think even, going through, grammar school, high school, undergraduate and graduate, I think when I got done with my graduate work, I mean, that's just such a change, and most of my friends probably went into more conventional careers. I was a chemical engineer, so most people went to the oil industry. I just wasn't excited about that. I just had in my mind, I wanted to do something that I felt would have a big impact. So that really was all there was to it. I just wanted to do something that I hoped would make a difference.
Surely it's a risky endeavor to turn down all those lucrative job offers to pursue something that did not, didn't have a clear path. Was there any outside pressure for you to, either from your parents, your friends, professors, to kind of stick a traditional route?
Really not. I mean, my parents always said to me, which I appreciate, that they just wanted me to be happy. I mean, they didn't really put much pressure on me. I suppose pressure that I put on myself was always been self-imposed. My friends, everybody did different things. It was an interesting time though. This was 1973, 1974. And it was, right after, during that whole time, Vietnam War. And I think society at that time, I could just see people, certainly my age, they were very concerned about society, about wanting to do important things. There's certainly a lot of protests and other kinds of things then, very different from what it is now. I think a lot, like I say, had to do with the Vietnam War at that time. So, but I didn't feel I got any pressure really from anybody.
That choice that you faced to pursue a career in a more lucrative field versus pursuing your passion is a trade-off that a lot of people, especially coming out of college, face today. What advice do you have for people like that?
Well, I mean, I feel that the most important thing for anybody to do is to follow their passion. I just think I've had students come into my office crying and saying, well, I want to do X. And I said, well, you should do it. They say, yeah, but parents don't want me to do it because it doesn't pay as much as Y, let's say. And I just feel like you want to have a happy life. You only live once. I think you want to have a happy life. So I do feel it's important to pursue your passion. I mean, also, it's interesting. I look back, it's kind of funny. I mean, you mentioned money, when I was an undergraduate student, I, I think I'm sorry, graduate student, I was getting something like $240 a month. And I, I did fine on that. And when I was a postdoc, I went up to like over $1,000 a month. And I mean, of course, this was some time ago, but I probably saved a greater percentage of money then than I probably do now, just because I wasn't used to spending money. Somehow it's like, you start to, whatever it is, whatever you get, you sort of figure out a lifestyle that accommodates the amount of money. At least I did. So, but that time as a postdoc, I saved proportionally quite a bit of money.
When you left grad school, obviously you turned down those job offers, and you knew you were going to follow your passion. But did you have a clear vision of what you wanted to do after college, or was it just you knew it wasn't that?
I knew it's just that I knew it wasn't that. I could see what I didn't want to do, and that was a very valuable lesson. I tell my students, it's really good to do interviews and stuff like that because that learning what you don't want to do, that's important. Obviously, learning what you do want to do is great, but it's not so easy. And I think going through that interview process, you learn a lot about yourself.
And I guess beyond going through that interview process, how do you recommend that college students, especially students that are freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors, even people who are out of the workforce and don't know what their passions are, how can they find their passion?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question, and it's not simple. I think various ways, depending on where you are. I mean, if you're a freshman in college, uh, I think maybe your classes, maybe your teachers, there's seminars and stuff like that. But I think a lot's talking to people. Sometimes, I mean, I'm a scientist, so a lot of undergraduates, they work in labs like ours or other labs, and, that can help. But I think there's summer jobs that can help. Um, but I think a lot of it's talking and reading and listening and, just absorbing these things. It's not easy. And sometimes it takes a long time. It took a long time for me.
So when you're in college, students have plenty of time, plenty of opportunities to kind of find their passion. They can join clubs, they can do internships. What advice would you give to someone who's since been out of college and might not have those same opportunities? Maybe they're working a 9 to 5.
Yeah. Well, I think there are all kinds of other activities though, where you can, learn things, um, in different ways. I mean, there's different adult education things. There's different, I mean, it would really depend on the area, but, there's still all kinds of open seminars, that's especially if you're in Boston. I mean, there's all these universities and things like that. So I think they, would take some initiative, but I think they could do that. And I think, certainly people have.
So what you did after you graduated is you followed your passion. And then what? Right? So what what are the steps that one can take after you decide to pursue your passion to actually make those passions turn them into a reality?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, first of all, I've always loved being a teacher. I like being a teacher. It doesn't take, I mean, you can see when you're teaching students that whether I think whether you're making a difference or not. And so, that type of reality I can get right away. I mean, not right away, but certainly, it didn't take 20 years. Research is a very different thing. Research, takes time and there are various steps. There could be simple experiments where you see a good result. There could be scientific papers that you write, which is sort of kind of a milestone. There could be patents that you get. And of course, over time, maybe some of those things lead to real things that make a difference in the world. So I think there are a variety of ways you can get, some satisfaction and rewards.
When you left and you got into research, what were some of the initial challenges you were facing early in your professional career?
Yeah. Well, so first as a graduate student, I was doing something, at the interface of chemical engineering and biology, and I didn't know any biology. And as a postdoc, that was even worse. I was doing almost all biology and surgery, and I learned almost nothing. So that was a big challenge. And I mean, I would read, I'd try to learn, I'd try to do experiments, but it was hard. So I think the biggest challenge was learning enough biology or enough about how to do experiments, that I could accomplish anything.
But when you graduated grad school, I've heard you briefly and other things speak about your difficulty finding tenure professor positions and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that was very hard. I mean, I so I did this postdoc, and then I tried to find faculty positions. And I'm a chemical engineer, and no chemical engineering department would hire me. Now, one might think, well, maybe I wasn't that good, and maybe that's true. But I did have papers in top journals, and but I think that a lot of chemical engineering departments felt that what I was doing wasn't chemical engineering, and it was more, it didn't fit. I didn't get any jobs there. I finally got a job in a nutrition department, but that's, I think, because the guy who was head of the department, he was sort of a benevolent dictator kind of department head. So he offered me a job, but then he left the year after I joined. So a lot of the senior faculty wanted me to leave too.
And that's a dilemma that a lot of people have, right? Especially when you're starting off and pursuing their passion. There's going to be a lot of naysayers along the way. There's going to be a lot of people who don't believe in you. Yet you need that wherewithal to stick through it, be strong, and continue on. And you did exactly that. What is the key? What are the traits that you think are necessary to develop that wherewithal that you developed, that you had, to withstand all those naysayers and the negativity?
Well, part of it's being stubborn. I'd love to say that I knew they were wrong, and I did, I suppose, think they were wrong, but that doesn't really answer the question. Part of it is, what was the alternative? I mean, I thought about, it's not, research like takes time to prove that they're wrong. But I just felt like, I don't know that I thought, I was in the position I was in as a young faculty member. I liked some of the things, and I liked the teaching, and I didn't want to work, like I say, in an oil company or something like that. So I just, kept trying, doing what I was doing, and, finally things would work out.
Dr. Langer, so after you had a few years of, or you had, notable success in many labs, you decided to start your own company. What was the first company you founded, and kind of what motivated you to take that step?
Yeah, well, the first company was a little company called Enzotech, which later merged into Alkermes, which is still around today. What motivated me was, I do this research, and I really thought the research could help people. We published it in Nature and Science and those journals. I thought it could help people, and I worked on it for 10 years. Nobody seemed to care. Anyhow, finally, and we did get a patent eventually too. But finally, I'd get calls from these multi-billion-dollar companies, and they'd read it, and they said, "Gee, could I consult for them, and could they license the patent?" And I thought, this is great. They gave me a grant, but both of them. But then, they would, and I thought this is the way things worked. They were going to develop what I did, and it would get out and help people. But the problem was, is they did work on it for time, maybe up to a year, and then they just kind of gave up. And that was very discouraging. So one of my good friends, Alex Klebanoff, who's a professor at MIT, said, "Bob, we should start our own company." And I thought, yeah, let's do that, because I'd love to see the things that we did make a difference. And so we did.
Yeah, that seems to be a trend that you've had to endure throughout your career, is people not believing in you. Yet you've remained strong, and you've held strongly onto your beliefs, and you've ultimately proved them all wrong. So I think it's just such a wonderful thing to do. And you said the key to that is just being stubborn and not giving up.
I think that's part of the key to it, is being stubborn and not giving up. I think you also have to believe, you have to believe in what you're doing. I think it depends which thing. Sometimes people give you a hard time almost because of a cultural thing, which is very different from a scientific thing. As a cultural thing, like I say, I was a chemical, to give an example, I was a chemical engineer. I was writing grants on biological things. And the biologists, of course, are the ones that were reviewing it. They would say, well, how could a chemical engineer do this? And a scientific thing might be maybe people felt the scientific principle would be wrong. But, so you'd have to look at each individual issue and see how you convince yourself. I guess I believed on the first one, I would come up with ways to try to convince the reviewers that even if I wasn't a biologist, that I had worked with biologists, and maybe I could get some of them to be consultants on the grant. And that would make them the reviewers ridicule me less.
You founded over 40 companies and you have over 400 patents and sub-patents, which I think is a wonderful thing. Yet it seems Moderna over the past couple of years has gained a tremendous amount of attention in the news. How did Moderna come about? Can you tell us a bit about the founding of Moderna and your role in the company as it grew?
Sure. Well, the way it happened was a scientist, Derek Rossi, who's a assistant professor at Harvard. He made a finding that he could modify stem cells to modify, like I say, a fibroblast with RNA to make it become what's called an iPS cell. That's kind of like a stem cell. And he wanted to start a company. He went to several places and they wouldn't do it. And Tim Springer told him, well, maybe he should come and see me. And Derek had a number of ideas for companies. It could be a reagent company, could be tissue engineer company, could be a protein company. I certainly thought when I listened to this that, the idea of making proteins by far, so that was what I suggested. He had some patents. I had certain ideas I thought that might improve them. Later on, not that much later on, he talked to Nubar Fayan, who was also an MIT graduate and had started Flagship. And Nubar thought very much the same thing that I did. And then Derek mentioned to me about Ken Chen, who was a cardiologist, a clinician. Maybe he could help. So anyhow, so the four of us started this. I should say the other thing that I had done, and this goes back to something you had asked earlier, is the work I had done early on, even in the 70s, was developing the first micro or nanoparticles that could deliver, encapsulate complex molecules like nucleic acids, RNA is a nucleic acid, and deliver them to the body or the cell. So certainly also seemed to me that if we were going to develop a way to make RNA therapeutics, let's say for protein delivery, that we'd need to be able to do that as well. So I had, like I said, done the initial work on that. And we kept doing work like that over the years, making these systems better and better. And I'd helped other scientists and companies do that too, like adding polyethylene glycol to the nanoparticles. We published a paper on that. And we published, by 2010, when Derek and I and Nubar and Ken started this, hundreds of papers. And I'd been involved in all kinds of companies as an advisor or helping found it to do delivery. So I knew, so that to me, Moderna's success hinges on many things, but from a science standpoint, it was figuring out the right modification of RNA and then figure out the right way to deliver it, which are the nanoparticles. So, so it was all those things that I ended up helping.
You just touched on Moderna's success purely from a scientific standpoint, but how about just overall? What has allowed Moderna to be such a success in either the leadership or anything else you think makes you guys unique?
Yeah, I think a lot of things. First, I think it's an awesome, powerful platform. Before Moderna, I had also had the pleasure of being a consultant for Genentech, for 30 years by that time, over 30 years. And I've watched Genentech make protein therapeutics, and they've been very successful. But proteins, it seemed to me, and this is one of the reasons why I thought the Moderna platform would be great. It takes a long time to make proteins. Like if you make like a vaccine with eggs, for flu, it takes a long, long time. Plus, you have to guess. Are you going after H1N1, H1N2? You don't even know. That's one of the reasons why the flu vaccine is like 40 to 50% effective. So at any rate, we, so one is like a powerful platform, that you could use over and over again for different things, whether it's vaccines or therapeutics. Two is great people. I mean, we were lucky and fortunate to hire Stefan Bancel as the CEO, who's been amazing, and Stephen Hogue as president, also been amazing, and lots of just wonderful, wonderful people working there over the years, including a number of my own students. Nubar also, as a chairman of the board, I mean, has been a real visionary. So it's really a team effort, and so I think all those things. I always thought Moderna would be extremely successful, perhaps the most successful biotech company ever.
So you spoke about kind of what differentiated Moderna from the competitors. I guess, were there any main skill sets or character traits that you or your co-founders had that helped to really ensure Moderna's success?
Well, I think vision. I think an unwavering belief that we could change medicine. I think, working incredibly hard. This is everybody, not just me. I think a real commitment, belief that we were gonna, change modern medicine, and we had the people and skills to do it.
So I guess moving on to the Moderna's development of the COVID vaccine. From 2000 to 2021, they received around $955 million from Operation Warp Speed to accelerate their development of the COVID vaccine, with $4.9 billion committed in total for producing over 300 million vaccine doses. So in the end, Moderna was one of the first companies to develop that vaccine. That's a very, very speedy turnaround. But what do you attribute that speed and the success of the vaccine development?
I think two or three things. First, I mean, Moderna had, by the start of COVID, by this, beginning of 2020, we had 13 products, 8 of which were vaccines in human clinical trials. So there was a whole set of experience, to do that. Two, we'd spent over $100 million on a manufacturing plant, not for the COVID vaccine, but for other vaccines. So we had that. And then third is, of course, the dire emergency, that so many people were dying from COVID. So that, so that was really a world emergency. And so things moved faster, whether it was the FDA or other things. So I think all three of those things. Other companies also got that kind of money, and then, were not successful. So I think you needed both the science, the manufacturing, and the emergency.
You spoke on the speed of that. What is that? How are you taking CEOs or placing CEOs into these companies and giving them the opportunity as founders to really run with that and take that and move at that speed? Because it's you're involved in so many things.
Well, if I'm say, take Moderna, I've been on the board of directors since the beginning, and really, you want to hire great people. We're, like I say, incredibly fortunate to hire Stefan Bancel as the CEO. I mean, I've always thought he's probably maybe the best biotech CEO I've ever seen. So, I mean, having somebody like that, you just want to let them do whatever they can, help them in any way you can, give them whatever advice they want.
So really, it's all about, or a lot of it is about hiring the right people, which I think is just a common theme that we've seen throughout a lot of these interviews.
It's not the only thing, but it's very important.
Makes sense. Now, you're also beyond your feats as a founder, you're also one of the world's most highly searched researchers. You founded one of the world's most influential pharmaceutical companies. You've also received over 220 major awards. You're over one of 5 living individuals to have received both the U.S. National Medal of Science and the U.S. National Medal of Technology and Innovation. You also received the Charles Stark Draper Prize, considered the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for engineers. You received the Millennium Prize, the world's largest technology prize, the Priestley Medal, which is the highest award of the American Chemical Society. You received the Wolf Prize in Chemistry, the Breakthrough Prize in Life Sciences, and the Kyoto Prize. What motivates you to keep going? What motivates you, Doctor, to keep striving for success?
The big thing I guess I keep asking myself is, with my set of skills, how can I have the biggest possible impact? And the way I think about it is coming up with ideas that I hope will be useful. 2 is bringing those ideas to the point where they can actually help people. And 3 is just the students and postdocs, just training the very, very best people in the world that can go out and hopefully do, great things. Those 3 things.
Based on all your experiences, successes, and failures, if you were speaking to, someone either graduating school now or someone just in general looking to achieve big things, what one piece of advice would you give them to best prepare them?
Well, again, it goes back to some of the things we said earlier. I always tell people to dream big dreams, to follow their passion, dream big dreams that hopefully can change the world and make it a better place. And probably expect that if you try to do that, you're going to, like I did, often run up against a lot of criticism. And I just would say, don't give up easily.
Interestingly, we spoke with Philip Engelbrecht, who's the founder of Shazam, and he said something very similar about the importance of shooting for the stars and the importance of having a vision. But if you can boil your entire career down to one life lesson, is that what the life lesson would be? Is that life lesson that really pulled you and allowed you to succeed throughout all of your trials and tribulations?
Well, success is always a relative thing, and it's also how you define it. To me, I think trying to do things you hope are important and not giving up easily, I think those things help. But things can happen. Some people just have unique talents. I don't think I'm one of them, but obviously some people can, when I met Julie Edwards, she has a 5-octave voice. That's a special thing. Different people have, there's great athletes. I think it really depends on the situation.
You mentioned that you don't have any unique talents, but you clearly have something that makes you very special, as you're one of the most accomplished people in your field, as well as one of the most accomplished entrepreneurs in your field.
Beyond his field, even one of the most
in the world ever. Yeah. What does make you unique? What differentiates you from your competition?
Well, I don't know. Maybe, I suppose really when I go back to it, so Robert Frost says that poem, right? The road less traveled. So when I finished my chemical engineering degree, and my colleagues did, most of them went to work for oil companies, petrochemical companies. That's what chemical engineers did. I ended up working in a hospital, a children's hospital, Harvard Medical School. I was the only engineer in the whole place. So I got exposed to very, very different things, and I thought about it differently because I was an engineer. So, so I think that experience in many ways probably differentiated me. just the exposure I had. And then the reason I got it, I suppose, was thinking about following a passion, which we talked about earlier. It was the lowest paying job by far of any job that I got offered, but I thought it was important. So I just took it.
That poem that you mentioned by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, is actually also one of my favorite poems. But it starts off, it says, 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. So for a lot of people, knowing where that point in one's road is, where the road does diverge, is a critical part of knowing when to pick the road not traveled or the road less traveled. How do you know when that inflection point is, when you must truly take the road not taken?
Well, I don't know that you do know. I guess, the way I looked at it, though, is the road I could see, I had 20 job offers from oil companies, chemical companies, and that was the normal road. And I just thought to myself, I don't want to go down that road. I wasn't really sure what road I did want to go down, but I knew it wasn't that. And I thought it was, to me, I wanted to do something that I felt I could make a contribution to people's lives. I thought about teaching, high school students, and developing curriculum for them. And I applied to colleges to do things like that. Nobody would hire me. Then I thought about medicine, and I wrote to a lot of hospitals and medical schools, and none of them would hire me either. Finally, somebody suggested writing to this man, Judah Folkman, who was at Children's Hospital, and I wrote him, and he was nice enough to hire me. And he was a visionary guy, and like I said, I was the only engineer there, so it kind of just happened. But part of it was realizing that some of these other roads, I just felt I didn't want to be thinking that when I got to be a lot older that I'd ended up spending my life increasing the yield of a particular chemical by a very small amount.
I mean, it's to find the road not taken or to find that inflection point is easy, especially when you're in college and you're kind of figuring out where to go after college. That clearly is an inflection point. But for people who are faced constantly with two roads, diverging roads, when they're actually in the workforce, how can they know when they need to actually veer off of the road more often traveled and start traveling on the road not taken?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I don't know that you do know. I mean, you gotta have to feel something maybe in your heart. You could always get advice from friends or counselors, but I don't know that I think it's a very good question for which there's not a clear answer.
Dr. Langer, we're going to now move to the final section of our podcast, which is our rapid fire questions. And the first one on there is, when did you know you've made it or feel like you've made it? You overcame a lot of, adversity in your career, but was there a moment where you felt like you made it?
Well, it's hard to know, I was glad when I got promoted to associate professor without tenure. I was glad when I got tenure. I was glad when I got my first paper published. I don't know that, there's different sort of steps along the way. I was glad when certain of my experiments worked out, but making it's hard to know. I mean, and it's also making it's in your mind. What does any individual feel making it is? All of those things that I just mentioned, made me happier and happy. But it's hard to know.
Do you feel like you've made it now?
Hard to know. I mean, I still have a lot of things I want to do.
I think, by the way, Doctor, the fact that you're so humble about all of your accomplishments is just so telling. Do you think that humbleness is certainly an aspect that helped you in your accomplish as much as you have?
I don't think so. I've thought about that. People ask me about that, but I don't think so. I mean, I know a lot of people who aren't humble. They've done great too. I think it must be other things.
On to the next question in our rapid fire questions. What has been the key to your success? And we might have touched on this before, but if you can, I guess, what is the key to your success?
If I had to pick, like I say, one thing, it was knowing something about chemical engineering from my background in college and graduate school, and then knowing something about medicine from the time that I was a postdoc at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. So I think that combination, something today we call convergence, that was that probably has been very, very important. That coupled with personal traits like stubbornness.
Doctor, what's the biggest regret of your career?
I really don't think I have any. I'm just trying to, I saw I feel like certainly there's all kinds of mistakes I've made, but I think you grow from, from failure. So I don't think that there's something I could point to. I mean, I've certainly had papers rejected, grants rejected, lots and lots of jobs rejected, all kinds of things that wouldn't be good. Companies fail. But if you don't go through that, I don't think you're the same person. So I don't really feel, that's the saying that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so I don't really feel like I have anything that I change or any real regrets.
Beyond that quote, is there a quote that you live by?
Well, I have my own, and it sort of goes back to what you asked before. I always say I have a couple of quotes that I think about and that maybe other people made them, but one thing I always say is a lot of times people will tell, I mentioned about dreaming big dreams that you hope will change the world. And I sometimes say, well, a lot of times people will tell you that your dream or your invention, your discovery, won't work. It's wrong. You think that's that I think that's very rarely true. I think if you really believe in yourself and you keep trying, that there's very little that's really impossible. It won't work. Another kind of quote that I have thought about as a professor is the following: that a lot of times, if somebody's a student, grammar school, high school, college, they're judged by the quality of the answers they give to other people's questions. But in life, I think what's even more important than the answers is the questions you ask. That if you give a great answer to an unimportant question, who cares? So I kind of think of my job as a professor dealing with graduate students and postdocs as someone who can help make those students and postdocs cross that transition for someone who can give good answers to someone who can ask good questions.
Dr. Langer, if you could recommend one book, what would it be?
One book. Well,
you can recommend a few.
Yeah, I'll mention a few. Well, one I really, really liked, which is probably very relevant to this podcast, is there's a book by, I think Eric Schwartz is his name, but it's called The Last Lone Inventor. And I think that's a tremendous book. It's about a guy named Farlow Farnsworth. And I won't give you, we'll give you a little, I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I have not heard of it. Well,
Farlow Farnsworth invented something in high school that we all use. It's called television. But his struggles and the patent struggles about it and what happened, I thought it was a great book. And by the way, other books that I've liked, but it's sort of fascinating to see how somebody could, just going back to Farnsworth, make such an invention and all the kind of difficulties that he ran into after he did it. And of course, that is something that's changed the world. Other books that I've liked, along different venues, I liked the book Oppenheimer. I thought that was a great book. I finished reading recently a book on Woodrow Wilson by Scott Brewer. I thought was very good. And then I liked sort of regular books. I remember years and years ago reading The Godfather by Mario Puzo. I thought that was great. So those are all, but books are terrific. And it depends what age you are and things like that. When I was a little boy, I'd read these Tom Swift and Chip Hilton books. And I don't know that they're around anymore, but they were great for a little kid to read.
Now, the last question in the rapid fire section before we close out is, over the next 5 years, what do you think will be the greatest medical breakthrough?
Well, really what I always say to that is it's something that, people will make advances in cell therapy and artificial intelligence and genetic therapies like mRNA. But I always feel the greatest breakthrough doesn't have a name because it hasn't been discovered yet. And one could think about this in the following way. If you ask somebody back in 2011, what would be the greatest breakthrough? And you mentioned something called CRISPR, which may well have been the greatest breakthrough in 2012. People would have thought CRISPR had something to do with cooking. I think you just can't predict. One of the great things about basic scientific research is that people will discover things and they don't have names. But that's the beauty of the research that goes on in academia, like at places like Harvard and MIT and other places.
It's wonderful. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to hear about your journey in academia, as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, and truly reforming the way that so many of us operate, and really reforming the way that the medicine and the pharmaceutical industry operates today. So it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Great questions by you both.
Thank you for listening to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if there's anyone else you want to hear from.